Running out of gas is never fun, cool, or convenient. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to fix a broken gas gauge so you never have that problem again. In this video, I'll be showing you how to fix a fuel gauge in a classic car. I'll also be showing you the different components and how they work together. If you find this information useful, definitely share, like, comment, and subscribe. It's how I know what kind of content to produce. And my goal on this channel is strictly to produce content that's of value to my listeners and viewers. Definitely watch this video all the way through. I've embedded several different hacks and tips to help you save time in the diagnostic process. Okay, let's get cracking here. In case you don't know me, my name's Dave Rupp. I'm a real estate agent at EXP Realty in Southern California. All my contact information is in the description below. This channel focuses on three main things. 1, classic car stuff. 2, real estate related information. And 3, home repair tips. Okay, so the car we're using today is a 1955 Chevrolet Bel Air. This car's had a fuel gauge issue for quite some time now. So today I thought I'd bring it into the garage, take a look at it, and fix this thing once and for all. All the information on this video today will definitely apply 100% to a 55 to 57 Chevrolet car, but it also will apply to Chevy trucks and other years of Chevy cars. We're also going to be covering the differences between Chevrolet's design and the other manufacturer's design. They're all relatively similar, so it won't be that difficult if you don't have a Chevrolet and you want to tackle the same type of an issue in a Ford or some other make. I'm going to show you enough information today where you're going to be able to solve your issue on other makes as well. Okay, so let's see what different components there are and how they function together. First off, we've got an ignition switch. So that's the same switch that you turn to start the car. Secondly, we're going to have the fuel gauge itself. There's going to be wire that's going to connect the ignition switch to the gauge, and wire in connections that'll connect the gauge to the sending unit that is in the fuel tank. The sending unit in the fuel tank is another component, and that's pretty much all there is to it. So let's go to the back of the car. I have the luxury of having an extra fuel tank and instrument cluster, fuel gauge, sending unit. So I've got them all set up in the trunk area, and we'll take a look at those. I'll show you how they work together and what they look like. All right, so in this car, the fuel tank is in the back of the car under the trunk floor, but I have a fuel tank sitting here. You can see the tank is here. I have an extra instrument cluster. This is what goes in the dash. This would be the fuel gauge here. I also have another fuel gauge sitting here so that we can take a look at that. And I also have the part that goes into the fuel tank called the fuel sending unit. And I'll show you how these all work together. Here we have a fuel gauge. I'll show you up close what this looks like. We have 2 little coils on the inside, and on the back there's 2 terminals for wires to attach. And where the terminals penetrate this metal plate, these are isolated by a non-conductive material. That way this would be maybe power, and this would not make the power ground or short out. So this isolation is important. This also has to be grounded, and the instrument cluster will have to be grounded. Okay, so as well on this sending unit, I'll show you the inside of this up close. I'm not going to get super detailed into all of how this works just because it doesn't really matter a heck of a lot. Bottom line to that, when this thing fails, you throw it away and buy another one. It is serviceable from some standpoint, but the time that you'll take to try to repair something like this is ridiculous. These things are probably only 50 to 60 bucks. Okay, so inside of here, if you look inside here, you can see there's a bunch of little tiny wires. So how this thing works, basically and quickly, is this is connected by this wire to this gauge, and the gauge is looking for a ground to be completed by this device. Okay, this moves up and down, and it has a little arm on it that contacts all those little wires in there, and it moves a point of contact to cause this to get either a better ground or a worse or weaker ground. The weaker the ground, the higher the gauge reads. So in this case, as you move this up, it weakens the ground through this electronic sender. It weakens the ground, causes the gauge to move up toward full. When this again falls down as you use fuel, the ground gets better and better and better, and then eventually when you run down to empty, the gauge will read empty, as long as everything's working correctly, obviously. Okay, so for testing, the first and easiest thing to test on these is the sender itself. Getting underneath the car and accessing this. It's kind of a little difficult to access. You'll probably need to jack the car up. My recommendation is put the car high enough to get the tires off the ground. That way if you're working with somebody else, they accidentally start the car and bump it into gear, you're not going to have the car run you over. The instrument cluster itself is a little bit more complicated to take out of the dash, so this is why I'm going to start here. So take this nut off of here, you take the wire off. The wire should be connected all the way up into the car to this fuel gauge. When you turn the key on the car, it should put power to the fuel gauge on one side, and the other side, this side here, right side of the gauge, would come to this point. If you take this wire here and you take it off of here, when the key is turned on, this gauge should peg over to full. If you take this wire and you put it on a ground and scratch it around, this gauge should go to here. You'll need two people if you're going to do it that way. If you don't have two people, what you can do is you can take this wire off, clip a jumper lead onto the wire like so, and then take the other end of the jumper lead and you can clip that onto some ground that you know is good and wiggle it around to make sure you got a good contact. Then get out from under the car, go up to the front of the car, turn the key on, and see if the gauge goes down to 0 or empty. Okay, another thing you're going to want to check is to see if this is properly grounded, because this, as you can see here, has a rubber gasket on it. The fuel tank is attached to the body of the car. The fuel tank is grounded, but this has to get grounded too. If it's got a rubber gasket, the only way this can ground is where the screws go through these holes and into the fuel tank. Sometimes they don't get a good connection there. So sometimes that will be your only problem, is a bad ground. So you take a jumper like this and you'll wiggle it around, put your wire back on here, turn your key on, put the other end of this to a good ground. You can hook it up to an exhaust pipe or some bracket, anything that you know has got a good ground. Get a good ground on this, check your gauge and see if it works. If it does, then that's the end of your trouble. You just had a bad ground here. It's not that common because you have several screws that are going in here. Each one of these can get a ground. Okay, this could be bad. One way to find out if this is bad is by ohm meter. Put one terminal here, other terminal somewhere else on here. If the ohm meter, a digital is preferred. If it either reads 0, if it's a analog type with a needle, or if it says OL, that stands for open line. That means that somehow inside here, in this wiring, there's no connection, or this tab or something has a bad connection inside of the sender. Anytime you test this to this and it says OL, or the gauge doesn't read at all, and you know you have a good contact here and a good contact here with your meter leads, then this is going to be bad. This is going to need to be replaced. The quick test for the gauge itself is when you initially turn the key on. If the gauge moves from here to here, or anywhere really, then the gauge is probably good. Okay, so the information we've covered so far should take care of about 95% of the fuel gauge issues that you're going to run into. If it didn't, see the link below. We're going to cover the rest of what we did to diagnose this car, the wiring from the fuel gauge back to the tank, and pulling out the instrument cluster out of the dash, doing some testing on the gauge itself. So if you need more help is there. Click the next video. Thanks for watching. Okay, so that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share this with a friend if you know someone else who's got an issue like this. Till next time,